Agenda, en el día de hoy invitamos al señor Atul Vashistha, presidente y fundador de Neo8, firma de consultoría líder en procesos de negocios BPO, particularmente offshore, y gerencia de la cadena de suministro, y autor del mundialmente exitoso libro The Offshore Nation. Autor también del libro Globalización Wisdom, los secretos de los grandes globalizadores, que saldrá a la venta la próxima semana. Al final de esta conferencia tendremos un espacio abierto para preguntas. Bienvenido.
Can you hear me? Señores y caballeros, buenas tardes. Ahora cambiaré el inglés. So that was quick. So a round of applause for the hospitality that we've been enjoying in Cartagena. I think most of you here know Santiago from Andy. And yesterday, we were in downtown next to the fort, Santiago and I. Does everybody know the concept of self-help books? Self-help books, right? So these are books that help you be a better person, you know, all those good things. So Santiago was looking for, but we went to the bookstore, and Santiago was looking for a self-help book. So went up to the lady at the counter and said, I'm looking for the self-help section. She looked at him, gave him a big smile, and then said, would it not defeat the purpose? If I told you where it is, right? You help yourself. So, but what I'm going to do today, I think it gets lost in translation a little bit. What I'm going to do today, though, is I've been so impressed, and I've enjoyed the hospitality in Colombia so much, that I'm going to actually provide you self-help. And I'm going to actually guide you through it. I'm really delighted to be here, especially a place that World Bank, 4 years in a row now, has rated as one of the top 10 reformers. And I've enjoyed the last 2 days getting to know many of you, understanding the business a lot better, and I can see why World Bank has rated Colombia as one of the top 10 reformers 4 years in a row. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a number of different things. First of all, I want to talk to you about trends in globalization and outsourcing. I'm going to talk to you about what makes a country or a location attractive. And then I'm going to give you some ideas on what can make Colombia a top 10 destination for outsourcing and globalization. For those of you that are not from Colombia or from Mexico or Dominican Republic or this whole region, I think you'll get many ideas on how some of these things apply also to you. Before I do that, let me just give you a brief background of where I come from so you understand kind of what my experience has been. I've been in globalization for 20 years. And the last 10 years, my own company called Neo8, which today is now called Neo Advisory, and we primarily do management consulting for large companies that you see. Can I point it? Yeah. The large companies that you see there, we advise them on how to outsource and how to operate in low-cost countries. So we've been doing this for the last 10 years. So when I talk to you, my perspective is very much on the buyer side. So I talk to you about how companies buy services, how companies make decisions on which locations are right for them. What I'd also like to do is, I'm hopefully going to try and finish in about 40 minutes or so. So we have a lot of time for question and answers. And the person with the best question is going to get a copy of my book that's coming out next week. So get your questions ready. All right. We also advise government and trade promotion agencies. We're very picky about who we advise on the government and trade promotion agencies because we don't believe that everybody has the same potential. So one of the things we try to do is either be very specific at what we do, or we focus very much on how do you build the right infrastructure, the right capabilities to be successful. All right, enough about me and Neo8. Let's talk about why you're here. When you start thinking about globalization, this started in the 1980s. You know, of course, it started way before then. We can go back to the 1400s or before that. But truly in services, it started in the 80s when General Electric, American Express, Citibank, Texas Instruments went looking for low-cost markets to operate in. And they started to take very simple things offshore. Simple things like data entry. So it was very, very simple task. To fast forward to today, 20 plus years later, and now we have a huge amount of companies, not just the large companies, but also small, medium-sized companies, outsourcing very complex activities. One of the largest video games company in the world is a company called Electronic Arts. Electronic Arts not only outsources the simple data entry, but their games are actually being developed in far locations as Ukraine, Vietnam, China, you name it. And the reason is because they are looking for talent that is different than what they may have. So what's happened during this whole time is what started as simple processes focused on cost control have now evolved to complex processes that focus on core competencies, but more importantly, what can I do beyond it? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time later on talking to you about how the decision-making in outsourcing has changed, where cost is not the only game. So the other thing that's starting to happen is that the customers are changing. What used to be the game for the largest companies, like General Electric, American Express, today you're finding much smaller companies outsourcing. You're finding startups in Silicon Valley, where I live, in San Francisco. We have startups that are starting their businesses and outsourcing right away, not just domestically, but actually internationally. You have companies that have 50 people, 100 people that are outsourcing, not just the large companies. The thing that I get most excited about is, as part of that process, India, Ireland, and Israel is no longer the game, no longer the only game. Many, many locations are coming online. And that's why I think outsourcing becomes very interesting for many countries. If you think about how customers make decisions today, cost is a given. And so when I look at the cost structure in Colombia, and I look at the cost structure in this region, there is definitely a business that can be attracted here. So your competition is not India, your competition is not China, your competition is this region itself. And if you look at the cost structure, that becomes really important, but one of the biggest advantages that you have is also the same time zone coverage. One of our clients is on the Chicago Board of Trade. So, if you think about it, the market opens for a certain point in time. Staying on schedule, getting the trades done on time is very, very important. For them, it's not an option. Their culture says, we want to stay in the same time zone. This was 2 years ago. They ended up going to Mexico. This was for IT development. That was a customer that would never go outside of Latin America or South America because that was important to them. So there's a market that exists today that is right for this market, not necessarily competing for India or China. Other thing that you find is there's companies that are growing very fast, and what they're looking for is capacity. There's companies that have operations in Europe or operations in South America, and they want local coverage, they want local access to talent. And this is the reason why companies like Siemens and others are here operating, because this is where they're looking for talent. Other reason we start to see for companies is time to market. Outsourcing gives them the ability to scale up when business is up and to be able to scale down when business is down. So it's not just a cost game. Outsourcing becomes really important to understand what other things are you providing to the customer that makes them stay. Otherwise, the business is like how manufacturing moved to Mexico and then it moved to China. If you don't invest in the right BPO and ITO business, the same thing will happen. That you will get the business initially, and then as your costs go up, that business will move to some other markets. So you have to think about what value added are you providing that goes beyond just cost. The most important criteria, I have no phone on me, so it can't be me. So, all right. So other than cost, which is a given for most companies, the number one criteria that makes companies decide where to go is about risk. And when you think about risk is looked at in 3 different levels. The first thing companies look at is, what is the risk of the country that I'm looking to operate in? And these are some of the factors that hopefully you can see that they look at. What is the politics like? What is the geopolitical structure? What is the business environment? What is the tax structure, legal structure? And then they look at the city, which is where the operation is going to be located. What is the business environment? in the city. You know, a great example in China, for example, is that one would assume, because Shanghai was so far ahead, right? One would assume that Shanghai would have gotten a majority of the outsourcing business. The reality is, a lot of the outsourcing business in China has actually gone to Dalian. Dalian was an area that was occupied by Japan for a period of time. So a number of people in Dalian speak Japanese, and they were one of the first locations to start outsourcing or doing business process outsourcing for Japan. The same thing happened with Beijing. Beijing is a bigger center for outsourcing than Shanghai in China. It's because the city was much more aggressive at going out and getting business. And then the last thing companies look at is the provider risk. This is the reason why today EDS, which is HP now, Unisys, TCS, have operations in many locations in South America. And the reason is because they are trying to provide a whole set of services to their clients that are not just from India or not just from the US, but wherever their clients are. And that's one of the things you have to take advantage of. So while all these challenges are taking place, companies are looking at this criteria to make decisions, what's interesting to me is how the providers and countries are responding. I think this conference is a perfect example of how this region is responding to this need. But the important thing is to recognize what is truly your competitive advantage and not just try to copy the business. Call centers, for example, is a very easy business to get because call center is typically driven by cost. But that business will not stay for very long if you don't respond to the other things, which is how do you provide a set of expertise for call centers where you are providing better value even though you may be 10% or 15% more expensive? What would make them stay with you? What would make them stay with you rather than go to the next location? So as you think about it, one of the things that I get excited about is that many, many locations are coming online. So your competition truly, if you think about Colombia, your competition truly is Costa Rica, Mexico, Brazil, Chile. These are some of your key competitors. When you start to look purely at call centers, there's many more competitors. But if you're leveraging finance and accounting expertise, you're less likely to have more competitors. So you really have to think about what businesses do I really want to develop. Let's talk about what makes a location attractive. And I think this could be a lesson for everybody. So in a little bit later, I'm going to talk specifically about Colombia. But as you look at this could apply to any country. It could apply to any city for that matter. Here's the most important thing about outsourcing, which most people don't realize, is if you go to a Fortune 500 company or one of the largest companies in the world and take a look at all the IT that they do, take a look at all their business processes, and what you'll find is less than 10% is outsourced. Less than 10% is outsourced. I believe that today, at least 50% could be outsourced. What that means is that there's about a 40% business that's available that could be outsourced today. It's just looking for a reason to be outsourced. It's looking for cost, it's looking for capability, and it's looking for that cultural compatibility. So this is a really important slide because what it tells you is that the opportunity is enormous, but the supply capability has to be shown to these buyers. They have to feel comfortable. They should be able to want to take the risk to do this. And you have to make sure, as you present your capabilities, you talk about how this risk is lowered for these companies. So as you think about the global delivery footprint, what you're starting to see is that countries are starting to specialize. And for many, it's been about history. India is a perfect example of a country where when I was 21 when I left a little while ago, actually quite a while ago, but I remember when I was growing up in India, people would curse the fact that the British occupied India for 200 years. But it's exactly the very reason India has this business today. It's the only reason they have this business today. Because there's a huge population that speaks English. Same thing in the Philippines. The US government forces have been there since 1930s. They built a base. When they left the base, the telecom structure, the English was so good. In fact, it's a very neutral accent that enabled Philippines to be a very attractive market for call centers and other BPO. Not in IT, because their technical schools are not that good. So it's interesting how many locations, and so what you're starting to see, for example, China is doing okay in IT and BPO, not very good. But the one area that China does very well is embedded software. And the reason China does well in embedded software is because you don't have to speak to somebody. You're programming for a chip. And so intelligence matters, language does not matter. But during the Olympics, China has taught about 35 to 40 million people to speak basic English that very soon are coming online in BPO and other areas. So when you look at Columbia, you have to think about it. When you look at your own region, think about what is it that's unique about you that you can serve now and then have a 5 or a 10-year plan to develop the next set of capabilities. To me, this is a classic example of competition. Think about where you're most competitive, and that's where you want to invest today, and then where you want to invest for the future. These are the factors that companies will look at. I divide them into these 3 categories. Certain things that you notice are extremely controllable, right? If you look at these, this is very much, some of them are short-term, that you can make changes very quickly. Some of them take many years. And based on what I heard yesterday, I think you are on a 7-year journey of change that is starting to show some amazing results. And if you stay on this path in Columbia, these factors are absolutely in the right place. By the way, when I'm done with this, if you give me your card or give a card to Santiago, I'll be happy to send the presentation to everybody. Happy to do that. There's other things that you start to see that these are things that are much harder to change, right? But they become really important. So these are time zone, cultural compatibility. I mean, these are things that change over a very, very long period of time. So you can't really control it. On the other end, you have the business environment, which you really control. And this is where one of the investments that countries like India made very early on was India realized that for companies and countries to trust outsourcing to India, they had to show that quality was excellent. And what India did was invested in this software technology CMM process. It's called Software Engineering Institute Capability Maturity Model. And initially, in the first few years, in the top 90 companies, almost 60 companies were from India. They were certified at level 5, the highest level you could be. They wanted to take the risk away from a client and say, you don't have to talk about quality because we are the highest certified. Unfortunately, the BPO industry has not been very active at setting that standard. And Carnegie Mellon University has been trying to promote this industry or this certification called ESCM that I think we ought to look at. Because that is one way to show the client base that you have the capability so quality is not an issue. I just wanted to use an example. I think Citibank does an amazing job at outsourcing. Not only do they use different suppliers all over the world, they use different locations. Citi is a great idea, a great example of a company that recognized that Bogota was a great location for them and moved an operation from Barcelona to Bogota recently, about 400 positions. That is exactly how you win. Is because over a period of time, you're starting to show the capability and the cost. Both go together. It's not just about cost, it's capability and cost. Let's talk about the attributes of an attractive location, and then we're going to talk about how Columbia is positioned. For the sake of time, I'm going to actually speed forward a little bit. But here's you started to see now is that you need a set of skilled labor. This is not manufacturing where you can use unskilled labor. In this business, you need skilled labor. In fact, one of the advantages I always tell American clients is typically when you outsource outside of the US, in call centers particularly, the average degree is much higher in the call center offshore than it is in the US. In the US call centers, you're much more likely to find somebody with a high school degree, whereas in foreign call centers, you're much more likely to find people with at least 2-year degrees, and more than half of them typically have undergrad degrees. So you're finding people that are capable of doing more. And so one of the important criteria in call center is first call resolution, right? So when the first call comes in, what % of the calls are resolved without being transferred? And in the right call centers offshore, what they have found, because it's advanced degrees, is that the first call resolution actually rises by almost 50% within the first year. And so many calls that are tier 2, more complex calls, are getting resolved in tier 1. That's the kind of statistic that makes a difference in a location, where cost no longer becomes a criteria, but quality, first call resolution becomes a criteria. Some of the other that you notice is, what are the population trends? Ireland was a very, very attractive call center in the late 80s, early 90s, into the late 90s actually. What happened? Ireland graduates 5,000, basically 5,000 engineers a year. That's pretty much what Dell hired in Ireland every year when they first went to Ireland. So before you knew, Ireland was fully saturated, could not meet its demand because its population trends were not right. And so Ireland became actually very, very expensive. And so the business shifted to other locations. And in fact, Eastern Europe is really benefiting from locations like Ireland. So to me, when you look at Columbia, it's important to recognize is that your 42, 43 million population is a very big plus for you, because you have a population, it's a young population, the growth trend is right, and it's a large population. So that's a very, very beneficial trend. From an infrastructure perspective, we talk about the fact that it's redundant lines, telecom lines, broadband lines, that becomes really important. A tremendous amount of stability in the last 7 years, and hopefully next year's elections will demonstrate to the world again that whether it's staying in power or transition of power is stability, and that again will be a positive symbol. And then I was very impressed with the attention from government. It is not very often that I go to a location where the president of the country actually opens a conference that's focused on this. The last time I saw this was in the Philippines. Gloria Macapagal, she shows up at these events. When they have a conference, when Philippines has a conference in New York, she opens a conference in New York. It shows that from the highest level, the government is absolutely committed to this business. It makes a very, very, very big difference to clients. And then, of course, regulatory framework. This is a Zonas Francas conference. It's perfect. I think one of the things you hear is how competitive this regime is compared to the free trade zones in other locations. That, of course, is very, very attractive to buyers. The other thing that I find very attractive is most buyers are looking for a long-term perspective. And the 20-year scheme that we were talking about yesterday is very, very important, because it tells you that doesn't matter what happens, what changes, you have a 20-year view. That provides a tremendous amount of stability. I'm very concerned, for example, about India right now, because every year there is talks about changing the tax structure on the BPO and ITO companies. Every year. They have been so successful. Now the politicians want to take advantage and tax those industries even more so when they've barely penetrated 10% of the market. And then, I think you see the other things. Labor costs have to be competitive. The work permit and other things become really, really key. I'm not going to stop here because you saw these slides yesterday from the others, but what's important here is you have an amazing base to work from. One of the things you always want to do is not sell yourself. Let your client sell for you. And what you see on this chart is companies that are international, all over the world, that are outsourcing here. And most importantly, you have domestic companies. To me, a good market is a market where not only do you have multinationals in your location, but you have domestic companies that are of good size that have the capability to expand beyond the location. And Columbia definitely has that. You start to look here and you start to see these multinational companies that are operating here, not just the buyers, but also the suppliers. And I think that has to be leveraged much more strongly. We saw this yesterday. One of the challenges, I think, Columbia, the biggest challenge you have is public relations. This is a 4-year trend, solid trend. But this is not the message. I think you have this message, you know it, I've heard it now. But this is not the message that goes out in the marketplace. You have to figure out how can you be in multiple places, in multiple mediums, not just on paper, speaking. How can others be talking about this? Think about how you can use social networks or viral marketing to get the word out there, how things have changed. I did a little note yesterday where I have about 5,000 people or so that follow me on different social networks. So I did a little Twitter yesterday on this change that I'm starting to see as I'm here, and I'm starting to get responses from others. So you have to think about how can you get the information out where it's not just you doing it, but others that believe in you that are doing it. So let's talk about what I believe is, I think Columbia is ready. I think Columbia has the right ingredients. I think you have opportunities you can take advantage of today. If you're from Mexico or if you're from Costa Rica, you have very similar opportunities. What you have to think about it is, what are you better at than others? But more importantly, I'm going to urge you to look at this region as a cluster. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about it. This is about attracting business here and then competing for it. Don't compete for it right away. First, make sure it comes to this region and then compete for it. So my team and I so I apologize if I'm off base because I have spent 2 days in Colombia. But of course, as a business, we've been monitoring markets in Latin America for 10 plus years. So we've been monitoring these markets, we gather statistics, and we've been doing it for 10 years. So my team and I, we put together a set of 12 things we believe that Colombia should be doing, and some of these you're already doing, by the way, to be successful in this market. So let's talk about it. They're broken up into 4 areas. It's country, some specific recommendations at the industry level, at the firm or the company level, and then at the individual level. Because I believe these are the 4 things you have to have happen to be successful. The first is you have to continue the government support for this industry. As this business grows, it will be very tempting for the government to start taxing this business. That's exactly what's happening in India today. And you have to make sure that that does not happen because the penetration of this business is very small today. If you put any impediments in its place, it will just move to another location. It'll just move to another location. So, don't be tempted as you start to see success don't be tempted to pull back some of the tax incentives and other things you're providing to attract companies. I would highly suggest that be very firm. Think of who you're competing with and how you can continue to compete. Manage perceptions about Colombia. You have to get past the old stories of safety, old stories of the drug cartels. It's really interesting to me how, if you look at the crime statistics, that Bogota is safer than many, many major cities of the United States, right? I don't think anybody in the US or many other locations would know that to be true, but it is true. So how do you make sure that you manage this public relations? And public relations is not about sending out these PowerPoint slides that say we're a safer city. Public relations is about making sure all the stakeholders know it and they talk about it. And to me, I think this conference is a good idea because what it does is it brings people to make it live for people, right? It makes it, I don't know, how many here have been to Sao Paulo? Sao Paulo? It's a very small group. But you can actually sense in Sao Paulo that it is not a safe city as you walk around. You can actually sense it. I'll be in Bogota tomorrow, but I don't sense that at all. And it's a collective nature of things that you create. But more importantly, you have to make an investment in Bogota, for that matter, Colombia, and the regions in different parts of Colombia being seen as safe locations to do business, to travel. Your tourism is up almost 100% in the last 4 years or so. I think those are good signs, but try to figure out how do you do, and I'm a big believer that public relations is not about hiring a PR firm, because that's the first thing when I ask somebody, what are you doing about PR? Oh, we hired a PR firm in New York. That's not how PR gets done today. PR gets done today for free. It's because there's how many Colombians are outside of Colombia? 4 million. You have 4 million fans, probably a lot more, that ought to be talking about it, writing about it, spreading the news. And it's all free. So think about how can you change the perception about Colombia, not just through PR firms, but every interaction that you have with somebody. I think this is going to be key for you. It's because you are doing a double battle. First of all, you have to convince somebody that Colombia is okay to do business, and then you have to convince them that you know BPO. You want the country question to be out of the way. You don't want them to think about risk, about country. So I would make a big investment in this area so that country is not questioned. It's more about what is your capability compared to somebody else's. This is what I was talking about, where you have to set a collaboration agenda. I'm glad that there's participants from 20 other countries. The way business is going in BPO is it's evolving as clusters. There's a European cluster that's very much focused around Hungary, Czech, Poland, Russia. There's an Asian cluster that's very much focused around India, Philippines, Malaysia. And then there's very much a South American, Latin American cluster. That's where Costa Rica, Colombia, Brazil, Chile are part of this mix. And so you have to focus on is how do you make sure that this cluster is seen as a very positive, very aggressive, the right place to outsource. So that when companies are thinking about outsourcing, they think about coming here instead of going to India. But again, like I said, that is your secondary goal. Your first is you have to attract business that people just think about Latin America, and then you compete for the business between these different locations. In the long run, you have to show that this is a very attractive location for any business. And the way you do that is by collaborating as a whole region and not just as an individual country. But beyond that, one of the things that I was very impressed with, I have to tell you, was your organization, Andy. One of the things I find when I go to locations like China and others is they have, or even Philippines, has multiple associations all competing with each other. And they end up truly competing with each other and losing the business. Because companies are looking for a stable location where they know that everybody comes together, everybody works together. And I've been very impressed with Andy, the way, and Zona Francas, the way everybody's working together. And I think that I would also encourage that the organization should be supported by everybody and really encouraged. Because buyers are going to look for that central point of coming together. And then when you start thinking about clusters, and I think it's on the next slide. What you've found is, I wanted to use Bangalore as an example because Bangalore did an amazing job at thinking of it as a cluster. So Bangalore actually got started in semiconductor very early on. Texas Instruments went there. They were doing engineering actually. And then the whole data entry, data center, basic software support of mainframe systems started in Bangalore. But Bangalore realized very early on that Delhi and Bombay and all these other cities that are much bigger were going to be more attractive. So they made a very concentrated effort on the education system. They became the most friendly place to do business. It was much easier to go to Bangalore and get a phone line, get an internet connection. It was much easier to find homes. And so they focused on not just the fact that the labor cost was low, they focused on all the things you have to do to make it an attractive place for a company to set up an operation and for their employees to work there and live there. And even today, Bangalore is about 20% or so more expensive than other locations, but Bangalore continues to do well. It's because they focus on this cluster, this power that makes everything want to come to Bangalore because they know if you're somewhere else, some of these things are missing, and it'll be much more difficult. Think about your educational institutions. You have great colleges, but how closely are they working with the ITO and BPO industry so that people are even more ready to work when they come out of college? Many universities in locations like Manila and Bangalore and Beijing are actually working with the ITO and BPO industry to develop programs that are specific to this industry. So people can get jobs or move into these industries much, much faster. So I spoke about Andy a little bit earlier. I think you have to really enhance the role of the industry association. And what you'll notice here is that, and I use the example of NASSCOM, I think CINDE in Costa Rica is also a very good example of an association that I think works very, very well. And they also work very well with Procomer, just like you work very well with ProExport. And so as you start thinking about it, one of the things the association did is it's not just about representing members. One of the things that NASSCOM has done very well is they have focused on what client issues are. So they realized very early on that security, data privacy was going to be very important issues in BPO. So they went ahead by themselves and collaborated with trade associations in the United States to make sure that they had the same rules that existed in the US, because India focuses primarily on the US market. So as Andy thinks about growing this business, I encourage you to think about the markets you're focused on, whether that's Spain or whether that's this region or the US. Think about the concerns that clients have, like data privacy, security, and how do you make sure that you have practices and laws in place that address those issues just like they would be addressed in the buyer markets. Create global-ready professionals. I know I'm plugging my book here, but one of the things you have to do is you have to make sure people know how to work with other cultures. In Europe, it's a lot easy for people to work with other cultures because just the way Europe is set up. We find this actually fairly challenging in the US. I find it fairly challenging developing people in the US that have an easy time working with different cultures. So if you're particularly developing outsourcing in remote cities, it probably becomes even more important to think about not just training them to be technically sound, but also training them to be culturally sound, right? Especially with call centers. Make sure you're making an equal investment in cultural compatibility, making them understand what it takes to work with the client base that may be situated in a different country, different time zone, different location. And there's some very established practices to be able to do that. The other thing you have to do is you have to think about building capabilities. Don't let this industry just develop by itself. Try to guide it. And what I mean by that is think about what are you ready for today? What are the areas you can compete in today? It's very clear that you're ready for Spanish language call centers. It's very clear, right? English is a little bit of a challenge. So if you want that to be a target, think of that maybe as a 5-year plan. And think about what do you do year 1, year 2, year 3 to develop that business. But you can go after the Spanish business today. Create credibility in the marketplace, create scale, and it seems like you have that, and then that takes you into a lot of other different markets. Think about also, are there other areas like finance and accounting, procurement? What are knowledge processes do you have? One of the things that Costa Rica that I was impressed with, again, remember the scales are very different. Your scale is very big compared to Costa Rica. But one of the things I was impressed with was how they have taken engineers and moved them into different roles. So one of the companies in Costa Rica is a company called, American company called Invisalign. They make those invisible braces. I don't know if anybody's seen those. And that brace takes about 8 different steps of computer-aided design. It takes 8 different steps. So over a period of 8 to 10 weeks or 12 weeks, they give you different mouth guards to change the look and feel. All that programming, 100%, 600 people work in San Jose, Costa Rica, doing that development. And these are dentists that they have trained to be, for many of them, to be computer-aided designers. They've also taken engineers. So they've basically said that if you want small engineering teams, our technical colleges are good enough that we can provide you that. But we can train them specific to the industry. So think about your colleges, think about the opportunities, and think about other areas you can dominate, because you graduate, if I'm right, 28,000 or so engineering graduates a year, engineering and business graduates. And because of that number, you can put them to work in many, many different areas that smaller countries would have a hard time doing. Also think about, because you have such a good telecom infrastructure, as outsourcing grows, companies will have to outsource infrastructure. Could Columbia be the location for the data centers? Your rent is right, your power cost is right, your human resources is right, and your telecom is right. So maybe data centers could be a potential business. So that's one of the things you have to do in both ITO and BPO, is think about where do you truly compete, and what does it take to compete not just today, but in the long run, and let's develop that capability over a period of time. Drive towards operational excellence. BPO and ITO will stay in a location not because you did it right the first time and you had the right cost, but you continue to do it better. Most companies will tell you that, companies that do this well, which I call them great globalizers, they'll tell you that when they outsource, and if they outsource to the right location to the right supplier, it is actually done better for them than they were doing it. And remember, they've been doing it for many, many years. So you have to focus on what philosophy are you going to adopt in business process improvement, and that has to be the way you do business. Whether it's Lean Six Sigma, or whether it's some other process management methodology, you have to figure out what are you going to use, and that has to be the part of the way you do business. It cannot be a separate process. It's how you do business. This is the reason why GE continues to dominate after all these years, because that's how GE's adopted that in every process that they do. You have to invest in business development and branding. I think brand Columbia, I know it's going to be very tempting for you, for each location to want to have its own identity. Invest in Bogota, right? Invest in, Barranquilla. Just every location, is going to want to have its own identity. And I think that's helpful, that's important to you. But the reality is, the first identity has to be brand Columbia. After that, the client has options. But as you face the world, I think you'll be faced with this decision. You'll have to think about it a lot. But you have to build a Columbia brand and not just a Bogota or another location brand. You'll find that many call centers, once they come to your location, initially they might come to one of the larger cities, but very soon they're going to start going to some of the other locations, like we were talking about yesterday. And they'll definitely do that because they'll realize that they have the ability to find talent in more than one location, and also it keeps their costs low because the secondary cities tend to be lower in cost. And once they like a location, companies want to expand there. So you have to think about how am I going to brand this? Is this going to be branded as separate cities constantly, or is there a way for us to bring it all together? Whether it's Andy or whether it's another organization, you have to think about how do you brand it as one so it's a Colombian brand and not just each city. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but this is just my viewpoint. I think you have to build scalable enterprise. BPO grows very, very quickly. In fact, you've seen in the last 2 years, you've doubled your business. And customers have to feel comfortable that everything is scalable, not just human resources, but also infrastructure. The reason India is losing business, so India is actually growing every year in its business, but they're losing market share. So if you look at the whole pie, they have a smaller share of the pie, even though they're growing, because the business is growing a lot. And the reason is because the infrastructure in India is actually not very good. So when companies are thinking about expanding in India, they have a challenge because the infrastructure is not meeting its demand. What used to be a 30-minute drive from the airport to the key industrial park in Bangalore now is a 2-hour drive. And so you have to think about is that as growth happens, how do you make sure housing, transportation, logistics, everything, education systems, how do you make sure that all that is scalable? Because you will grow fast if you continue with your policies that are in place today. You have to think global. And it seems you already are. What you'll find is that I think the Citibank example is a very good example of a business that's moved from Barcelona to Bogota because you're providing that need. But think about the interaction that team now is having. When somebody was sitting in Barcelona, it was much easier for them to understand the European customers that were calling in. Now when they're here, it goes back to what I said before, which is global ready professionals, right? How many here have read this book, The World is Flat? See, there's a few of you. Pick up that book. I would read that book because it gives you a great view into how the services market has changed. It gives you a great view. It's a very easy read. My books will put you to sleep. That one will keep you awake. And then finally, you have to adopt a continuous learning mindset. What I find is that the countries that are doing well, or the companies, thank you, thanks for the applause. The companies that are doing well, the countries that are doing well, have absolute continuous improvement mindset. They've recognized that BPO is going to be successful and we're going to keep BPO here because we're going to continuously improve. And in some of these cultures, continuous improvement was not part of the culture. But what they did was they introduced these courses, like Six Sigma and others, very early into the colleges. They made sure that it was part of every employee training as they were coming into the company. And then they made sure it was integrated with their performance management systems. The bonuses are based on that. They make sure that the clients are aware. So they're setting these service levels, they're setting these criteria. So the customers know that I'm going to pay you not just based on your cost of labor, but I'm going to provide you incentives that are based on service levels. So this becomes very, very key. And then be flexible. One of the key things, be flexible to be trained by service levels and by service providers. I think 12 is enough. 13 is bad luck, so I stop right there. And what I'd like to do now is open up for any comments. Feel free to challenge me. It'll give me some more material for my next book, or ask any questions. He's bringing the mic to you.
Okay. I'll make it in English. What's your opinion about Colombia's passion as a brand?
What is my opinion about Columbia?
Colombia is passion, is our brand, our new brand for the world. I want to know your opinion, because I've heard different things.
Yeah, Columbia is passion. I like, it makes me want to come and visit you. Right? To me, it's a tourism brand, is the way I look at it, right? To me, it's not a business brand. So I do have a translation, I hope. There was a question up here somewhere, right there.
Hello. How do government incentives in India compare to those provided by Colombia right now
So the incentives in Colombia are better than the incentives than in India. So India does have one little thing right now, is that if you are part of the special economic zones, your exports are tax-free. So you're actually not taxed on exports. But it takes, based on what I've been told, it takes 3 times as long in India to set up that operation, and almost impossible to close it.
In order to get prepared, would you be able to give us what you think the 5 or 6 economical activities that will be going searching for offsource within the next 10 years?
Oh, so what we're saying is,
in order of importance.
right. So in terms of what is going to be outsourced that Colombia may be right for?
Or other countries like Caribbean, whatever.
Right. So the first industries that got outsourced was financial services, telecom, and technology.
That would be coming out.
Right. So those are the first ones, right? And those, they tend to be, they tend to require more maturity. What's starting to happen is that retail, healthcare, and then logistics is getting outsourced a lot today. And there's many, many processes in retail, healthcare that are very data entry centric. And so this is where cost is important, scale is important, and quality is important. And so if you're, and there's a propensity to want to be in the same time zone, because anybody that's late to outsourcing wants to try to keep things closer to them. So you tend to find an advantage in same time zone locations because they want to be close to you. And so I would make an investment, depending on the region where you are. If you're in healthcare and you have a very good, medical system, for example, it doesn't hurt. Philippines does a lot of medical transcription because there's a lot of nurses, trained nurses in the Philippines, so they have them do the transcription. So if you're telling a client that I'm going to have somebody who doesn't know medicine do a transcription versus somebody who does, guess what they're going to choose if the price is fairly close to each other. I don't know if that helped, hopefully answered part of your question. It's right here. He's getting good exercise.
How are you? I'm interested in having one of your books. Did you bring anything with you?
I didn't bring any other books. I only have one. If you ask me a good question, maybe it's yours.
Well, considering you're such a, you teach global wisdom, so is your book here available in Colombia now?
It's on Amazon. So I don't know if you can order from Amazon here, right? Well, I was convinced yesterday that I'm going to do a Spanish version. I'm going to authorize a Spanish version.
Guatemala. I want to know if exists an annual convention or special fairs where the outsourcing companies meet together once a year and invite people from the other region, or we can find for you there?
In terms of conferences or?
Yeah, annual conference.
Yeah.
Or convention or something like that, meetings.
Right. So I was talking to Santiago yesterday about, there's many events all over the world, but there's a few that stand out. One of the most bigger association is the International Association of Outsourcing Professionals, which is based out of the US. They do events all over the world. I think those are good events to think about. One of the other advice that I made yesterday is, I think coming to events is a good idea. It's a good idea to learn. But if you're trying to promote your company, think about if you have a unique thing or experience you want to share. Let's imagine you have a good customer and a customer is willing to speak on your behalf. These conferences are always looking for people to speak. So not only can you learn, but you can also have your client speak. That gives you much more credibility. There's a conference group called Outsource World that does events. Also, there's a conference group in Europe called Shared Services. They do a lot of BPO conferences. There's a ton, and then there's some online events too. In fact, if you go to LinkedIn, linkedin.com, you will find that there's a number of outsourcing groups where there's a very good amount of exchange that happens. Those are, again, I go back to it, those are some of the investments that I would make, right? That you have to be active and you have to put out feelers. In fact, I put out one yesterday, right? I said, can other countries learn from the stability that Colombia has gained in the last 7 years, right? So I put it out in one of the LinkedIn groups, but there's a number of events you can definitely go to. One of the best places to go is, it's a magazine called Global Services. So when you go online, just search for Global Services magazine, and if you go there, you'll probably see all the events, and you'll see a lot of articles also. Yes, sir. Oh.
De acuerdo a lo que tu experiencia, México, Costa Rica, Argentina y Chile
Keep going. He'll translate for me.
Han sido los países más exitosos en Latinoamérica en el negocio del BPO y el call center. ¿Cuáles fueron los factores claves de esos 4 países para ponerse en ese liderazgo?
No.
¿Cómo era la pregunta aquí?
You mentioned that Brazil, Mexico, and Costa Rica, and Chile. Argentina, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Chile are one of the key players in BPO. Why they were so successful? What they did to be so successful?
Well, so I would not say that they are so successful. I think they're just early in the game. I would not say that any country in Latin America is extremely successful today. They were just early in the game. And so as companies were looking to outsource, they have gone to these locations because they've been out there. And I think what you have to get in the game and make sure people are aware. I mean, you have your market, outsourcing market now, offshoring market is $1 billion. That's good. So you're not starting at 50 or 100 million. You're at $1 billion. They were just early in the game. I think it is, companies will always want alternatives. So you don't want to be the only player. So companies will always want alternatives, and Mexico will have certain things that they'll do. You'll do certain things. But think about the success you've had in the last 7 years attracting foreign direct investment. I think you have to apply some of the same philosophy to ITO and BPO. Yeah? Do we have 2 more minutes? Okay. Yeah, we can get one there, and then last question. You want to start first? Okay.
Okay, let's say that we have been late players in this business in Colombia. And one of the key factors in order to be successful is that you may have a very good labor train in any of the sectors of the BPO. And we have to do that. We have to do the job in order to be successful. In which sector do you think, or sectors, do you think that we should start doing the training in order to attract those investments?
Yeah, so please take this advice as somebody that, I would probably want to spend more time before I made a recommendation.
From your experience, your perspective, your global perspective.
Right. I would say healthcare is one area that I would, because you have both, right? You have a good university system and you have a very good healthcare system. And I think so, that comes together, and you have scale. I think that's one of your advantages. So I would say, I think that's one is good. I don't know how the retail business is in Colombia, but if a retail sector is fairly developed, I would make an investment in that area too, because I think retail is going to be a very big area of outsourcing. Retail has not done very much in BPO, and retail has huge opportunity for BPO. Healthcare has huge opportunity for BPO, and they will be forced to do it. Retail because they're very competitive globally, and healthcare because healthcare cost structure is terrible. And so they have to outsource. Those are the two that stand out. And there's always the others, like, telecom and others. The problem is, if we start looking at financial services and telecom, everybody's doing it. So the question is, do you really want to compete with everybody? Or you want to be opportunistic there? If somebody comes, great, but focus on industries that others are not competing for as much. Logistics is another one, and it seems like there's a focus on that here. I think logistics is also a very fast outsourcing business. And Asia will definitely capture a lot of the logistics. It's just the way things are, because a lot of the trade comes from there. But I think logistics has an opportunity also in this hemisphere. I think last question, then I'm done. No, we're done? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.